So who's this?
Well, now we know how it
You are
sounds to
monitoring
everyone else.
yourself.
Oh my goodness. I just was surprised, and I'm grateful that everybody is alive and looking right into the right screen where we have our fabulous Dr. Natalie Petouhoff as guest again. And we are very grateful that you could make it. And I guess I'm the one to be blamed, as I wanted to know if the LinkedIn Live is properly working aside of the Facebook one. And well, Natalie, as you have been with us now for the third time, I think we can make the introduction, let's put it like Thomas did it, brief. So, what is your background? And I'd love to know that you tell our audience what was inspiring you, especially to write the book in orange, which is just in view behind you. Oh, and in front.
You got two copies.
That
My
is
God.
improvement.
Clever. You'd think she was some kind of rocket scientist.
Oh, so I think I'm a thought provocateur.
Oh,
I like it.
have that again, please. A thought
Hey.
provocateur.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, well. Is that on your
How is
business
it?
card now?
It should be, right? I'm trying it out for size, but I think my whole life I've always asked questions, right? And the
Yeah.
questions are aimed at getting people to think about what they're currently doing. And does that make any sense at all? Or is there a different way to approach this?
What's the result so far?
Well, it does provoke thought, sometimes good, sometimes controversial, but I guess that's kind of the point. I think a lot of times as you're progressing along in your life and your career, if you're not really asking yourself questions and you're not asking the people around you questions, then it can get pretty stagnant and we can just get caught in the same old ways of doing things. And so because I am by nature very curious, I'm kind of always looking at things and going, could it possibly be better?
I know I'm guilty of trying to walk through walls when I could just walk around them. So, yeah.
Marshall, it would be a much easier existence if I would just go, that's a wall. It doesn't really need tearing down. Nobody's asking me to do this. Just ignore it and walk around. What's up with us?
It's a great
And
question.
the other thing is, it is a much more comfortable situation if you have the brains and the guts to place the questions instead of being asked the questions. Yeah. And even if one takes it into the content together with the empathy approach, then I guess that you will politely ask and get into in the details of things, whereas sometimes male beings are known to be less thoughtful and more rude. Yeah.
Hey now.
So that
I don't know if I'm going to attach it to how we identify as a gender.
okay.
I really think it has a lot to do with um, spending time soul searching, spending time feeling versus doing.
Yeah.
And I think more and more what we're really seeing, I mean, there's a lot going on in the world of employees, right? We see the layoffs, we see cognitive dissonance, we see employees trying to figure out, do they work from home? Do they work remote?
Mm-hmm.
All the time, part of the time? What is our identity as a corporate citizen? How valuable is it to be with your colleagues? And I think there's so much that's going on. It can be really easy to just kind of fall, hey Ray, hi, how you doing?
All right.
We can easily fall into complacency And I think this is really a time to really start questioning.
Yeah. The uncertainty in planning in the overall times is an interesting topic, such as how can empathy help here to overcome one or the other hurdle?
But I think what I see, because I read the headlines every morning, and I see a lot of mandates and a lot of this is how we're going to do things, right? And so I get that's a style of leadership, right? And I think it's not an inclusive style of leadership. And I get there's a sense of, I think remote work made a lot of leaders very nervous, right? Because,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I traditionally came from cultures where if they can't see you, then you must be, I don't
Doing
know,
nothing.
doing nothing, right? Somehow, right? And for those of us who appreciate our jobs and appreciate having employment, I think at least I over-indexed on working, right? Because it was like all hands on deck. We have to get through the pandemic. This is a really important time. And if all of us do our part or more than our part, then we'll make it through. And a lot of most companies did very well. And I think now what we're seeing is a knee-jerk reaction to go back to some command and control, right? And tell versus ask. And I think, two things are true. If you sit in the seat of the CEO or the boards and you see their reaction and what they're trying to accomplish, it's really important for employees to sit in their seat and understand where they're coming from. And at the same time, I think that it's really important for leaders to also sit in the seat of employees and understand from their point of view how the world has changed, how they have reorganized their whole life to be able to continually provide for the company. And now doing another major change may or may not make sense, right? And so what I see oftentimes happening is people just forget to actually listen to the person across from them. And that's really the book, Empathy in Action, that we're kind of alluding to here. Really, you asked me at the very top of the hour, why did I write it? And I think that so much misunderstanding happens because we think we know, we think we have the answer, right? And I would say 99.999% of the time, I learn that I don't know what I don't know, that I don't have all the answers, and I can't possibly understand what's the best thing to do without talking to other people. And if you look at design thinking, for example, right? So companies like IDEO use this design thinking process to be able to design a process or products. And the very first step is empathize. Understand who your customer is, what their pain points are, what would be better if you solve them, what would the value be to them. And then don't just do this theoretically, but actually look at being in their shoes and understanding from their point of view. So there was not too long ago, there was a whole dialogue about Southwest Airlines. And I think one of the things that Herb Keller did really, really, really well, and why that airline became to be a very beloved airline, was that he did what's called management while walking around. And it's a very old technique, right? But what that did, and here's what's really fascinating to me in the book, right? In this book, I think what we did was we named something that has been done by amazing leaders since the beginning of time, which is to really understand their constituency, their employees, their base, their customers, the people that they lead, and really understanding their point of view. And when you do that and you hear from their point of view, because I mean, you could get feedback as a leader, right? and you can make conclusions about that. But until you step into the shoes of the people executing it, then you don't really see what the effect of that is. And so what I think Herb Keller did really well was he did listen to employee feedback, but then he actually went into the company at various levels and on a regular basis and heard from people, saw what it meant. We're going to do this mandate, or we're going to have this rule or this policy or this procedure, or we're going to change things like this. As a leader, go into your organization and actually see what's happening and what's the effect of that. And did it turn out the way that you thought it was going to, or are there some tweaks? And I think that that's part of what we see great leaders do. And when you stay at the top and you just give people mandates, but you're not really seeing the effect on the everyday life of, and the everyday productivity and the everyday sensibility of what it means to be an employee, I think that there are things that you're missing, that you end up not knowing what you don't know. And as a result, the direction that you may be giving can be counterproductive, can result in boomerangs that don't quite feel right and don't end up accomplishing the thing that you thought that it would. And as a leader, that's one of the most disappointing things that can happen, right? Is that if you have a direction and you're pretty convinced that that direction is a good direction, and you decide we're going this direction, but you never really check it, and then you wait 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then you look at the results and you're like, what? How did that happen? I really thought we were on the right track. I don't know. Have you guys seen anything like this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's a mismatch in approach to life, or approach to business life, really. A leader should be leading people. A leader should not be leading assets or resources. A lot of what has been done with personnel over the years has tended to treat people like assets. And you don't listen to your assets. You just arrange them. You think maybe that has something to do with it?
I think it has a lot to do with it. I think that we're not chairs, right? We're not a machine. we're not a machine in a factory. I mean, we're our assets, right? And we've talked about this before, where employees and customers are assets, yet not on the P&L, but chairs and machines in a factory, all those things are assets and they're accounted for. And so you can start to think of an employee as an asset, like a physical thing that you need to somehow manage. And I think that if you look at a chair and you look at a person, you'll see there's a lot of difference, no?
For most people.
Understand very well.
Most chairs have more than most chairs have more than 2 legs, yeah.
Managing by wandering around, I like that one, and it is more than show face, because it takes into account that you get a feeling and you have an interest in understanding what is really happening. And what you, in the starting minutes, said, you ask questions and you get answers. If you are a good leader, from my perspective, and as you asked, if we have experiences, if you are afraid to lose control and you go forward and take the position, it's better to check the ideas with my people than just to tear down the walls and get walls, but out of glass, so I can see through and have a control over my people. I prefer the one like, probably I'm too much in history, that somebody like Caesar or others were great leaders, or Napoleon, because they had a feeling for what they people can achieve, and they encourage them in a right way. But Thomas, you were starting.
They had the ultimate means to deal with objections. Far better the question of Irit.
It's a good question.
Hi, by the way, Irit. How are you?
So
what do you say?
I think that's right. So there's the management by walking around, which is to show face, right? So oftentimes you can just show up and shake hands and talk to people. But if you're there genuinely with an open heart and an open mind, and you're there to listen and to really understand and to really build those relationships and to learn from one another, that is going to pull out from people their best ideas. They feel more fully invested in contributing versus this, what I want us in terms of being empathy practitioners is to really move away from that surface level, right? That can happen a lot in management. And to really start to focus on really spending time with people and being able to have authentic, genuine conversations. And of course, that requires psychological safety, both on the part of the leader as well as the employee. And I did want to address management by walking around in a remote world. So definitely it's more difficult because you're not physically in the same room. But I think one of the things that at least I learned to do in the world of Zoom is to be able to really spend time. So just like, you can show up to a meeting in person or do management by walking around and be there at a very surface level, or you could really be more interested, right? So I think one of the key things about being a great leader is to be interested in the person across from you, right? And in this case, it's StreamYard, or if it's Zoom, or if it's Teams. And instead of coming to that particular meeting and being there to deliver information to someone else, start the meeting by saying, I want to check in, right? And so this requires a different kind of leadership where instead of saying, okay, well, here's our agenda and here's what I'm going to tell you, now go do it, have at least one meeting a month where with your group, you're saying, this is a check-in meeting. What are we doing well? What could we do better? And instead of this being a complaining session, for everything that you think that we could improve, bring 2 or 3 ideas and bring your top one on what would be better if, right? And have that kind of back and forth. It's actually called a conversation.
Goodness
What's
gracious.
that? Conversation. Let's get back a little to Southwest. They had this CEO that followed this management style. Walking around, getting the feel. Now, devil's advocate in me says, well, they changed it. Apparently it was wrong.
So I didn't work at Southwest, right?
But they changed their philosophy. Yeah. So you do normally, being a rational company, you changed your philosophy only because there's a better one to follow.
So this is what I understand, Thomas. I understand that when Herb retired, they chose new leaders, and those leaders had a different agenda. And their agenda was very focused on shareholder value, right? And we talk about this in the book. When you're beholden only, and I'm not saying companies shouldn't make money, because if you're not making money, then you don't have money to employ people or pay them well or provide great benefits. I'm definitely not against making money. Making money is a really good thing because it's what keeps the engine going, right? It fuels the whole operation. But their focus, so Herb, it wasn't that Herb didn't want to make money. Herb wanted to know what was important to his employees and to his customers as 2 of the most important assets. And he thought that understanding the key to what they wanted and needed and delivering on that would then fuel the revenue engine and profits and margins. And for a long time it was. So as I understand it, the new leadership they brought in had a different focus. And that focus was more on cost cutting, shareholder value, and less on focusing on the input of employees and customers. And so, one of the things I think that happens to companies that focus, in a particular direction, like employees and customers, that gives you a long runway of success. And so then
Runway
I
is a
think
good
the
word.
thinking there was that we could now come in and we could go back to the old things of actually starting to look at cost cutting, and that we'd be far more successful. And I think the lesson there is that Herb gave them a long runway. It took them a while for things to catch up with them, right? And there were many reports of employees saying, there were issues with internal systems that, were outdated and needed to be improved, and money wasn't spent there fixing those things. And at some point, it hit a critical mass of problems of not fixing these things. And then you have a breakdown or deconstruction of the model. And so I think that there's a false sense of security that going back to that cost cutting model, because Herb gave them, in my opinion, Herb gave them such a long runway that when they initially reverted to this new method, which is, shareholder asset focus, that it was working. But at some point, there's a point where it doesn't work, right? And I think that that's what happened to Southwest, is that it caught up with them. And so as a result, they had a pretty large event that will be maybe difficult for them to recover from. And so what will be curious as a purveyor of watching the process over years of how companies lead, what they focus on, right? Southwest is a really great case study to determine if you focus on employees and customers, does it work? Yes. If you change the focus, do you have a runway? Probably. How long is that runway? And then if you focus on an old paradigm, which is just shareholder value and not really spending money in places that employees are giving you or customers are giving you feedback about, what happens, right? So I think this is a fascinating case study
And
to see what
Fully
happens
agree, yeah.
to
It
a
is
company
inspiring. Yeah.
that changed back to an old paradigm.
And I just want to make up that by quoting Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte, I could have chosen the long walk, either Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi. If they would be leaders now in businesses, that would be a very interesting perspective to take, how somebody as a role model would in peace go forward with some of the ideas which are so beneficial and taking empathy more into account. Because we do not get the laugh of this heart as employees sometimes, whereas people are very money driven. So that was what keeps me ticking in the way of that I would love to learn more. Are there further examples than the one from Herb you have in the book where you say there are other samples of taking a long runway, to put it like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's companies, some of which we name, right, and some of which we don't name, that have this focus on really using an empathy practice as a leader, right? And so I think that, and I want to be really clear about that. When you're an empathy leader, it's not that you're not focused on revenue. It's that how you're getting to the revenue is different. So when you're just focused on shareholder value, oftentimes the main priority is the cost cut, right? And that short term can result to the results that you're looking for. doing that in absence of listening to what your employees and your customers are asking, wanting, and needing may result in shortcutting the very thing that's making you successful. So we go back to two assets: employees, without which, if you don't have them, there's no one to build products and services. And without customers, there is no one to consume the products and services that you create, right? So to me, those are the two most important assets in a company, yet neither one is on the P&L.
And interesting enough, taking that perspective, how can we give more positive examples that empathy, as we feel it in our small group here, is a real game changer? And that if we go for the products which are on the market, which are very happy that they have some AI components implemented, use it in a smart way to help people to be their best towards the customer.
Right. So one of the things that can happen when we start to look at, using things like that. So there's a lot of conversation about AI lately, right? And so what's the role of AI in the future of work, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about in the book, because the book is a good part of the focus is on customer experience, but parallel to that is employee experience. So if you think about it, you can't really create a customer experience without employees.
And
Unfortunately, we are not in the position. Sorry, Marshall. I keep my mouth shut.
That's okay. I was just going to comment that it's true that you cannot have an empathetic company when your approach to your employees is the beatings will continue until morale improves. You've got to turn your empathy inwards as much as you do outwards. You're working with people. Again,
And
not static assets.
And I wanted to encourage that if we have the feeling that we would walk on the right side of the street, that some people which are very focused in facts and figures would love to see the proof of concept in numbers and facts. And this is, again, the long runway. As we change a model, it will take some time to get some solid proof in facts and figures to underline this and to give that concept a fair chance instead of older, more traditional concepts which have been proven.
Right. And so a lot of the conversation that I've had when I talk about the future of work and the future of employee experience is that companies have been successful operating the way that they are. They have made profits, they've had large margins. So is it possible that this is the best way forward? And I would say that times have changed, people have changed, the zeitgeist of the world has changed, and the zeitgeist of work has changed. And I think it was changing. And I think the pandemic gave us a cause for pause that allowed the whole world to slow down to compare it to where we were, almost a stop. In that silence, it gave us the opportunity to personally and professionally examine our own existence, what was important to us, our families, our relationship to work. And I think it permanently changed a lot of people. And what you see in terms of the zeitgeist, what it produced was the Great Resignation. People just said, you know what, I want off this rat race. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to take early retirement. I'm done. I'm going to reskill. I'm going to go do something completely different. I'm going to move, right? And so you saw a lot of kind of conscious collective in a particular reaction. And now you see a phenomenon of quiet quitting, right? Where people aren't necessarily ready to leave, but they're not giving 300% or even 100%
Why should they?
right?
Why should they? They
And
are only getting 100% of a salary.
And the point is that Phänomenien is well known. In German, it's called innere Kündigung. And you have, for instance, with some gender-specific items, when females decide, instead of going for the road again, they become pregnant and take a time off, which is financed or which is accepted as a normal procedure, and then come back. That is another effect Thomas was so kind to observe, as I was going in facts and figures on the one end, and he was going to check up the boomeranging, such as that people are deciding because quiet quitting or less quiet, loud quitting or complaining has the other side in seeing and searching the safety of a known environment and having a safe income. What do you observe on that from your own perspective in not only by creating the book, but walking around talking to people a lot now?
so I think one of the things that's happened is that culture in many work environments has been eroded, right? There are very few cultures where you feel a sense of belonging, a sense of personal respect, a sense of gratitude. And so I think part of where quiet quitting came from was the cognitive dissonance that employees feel, right? So there's an implied contract or an explicit contract of if I do X amount of work, I will get X amount of pay. But when you feel like you're not being appreciated, when you feel like I'm being taken for granted, that creates cognitive dissonance. And there's some sort of bargaining that we do with ourselves to say, well, I'm giving you 100%, but in return, I'm not getting 100%, right? And the very tiny little piece that would make it 100% or more than 100% is the feeling of appreciation. A leader saying thank you, leaders appreciating what you're doing, right? And so it's a very interesting piece to leading that is, if you can find it in yourself as a leader to exhibit this, it reduces that cognitive dissonance and it increases the likelihood that an employee will give their full participation. And so you see a lot of layoffs, right? And I think some of that is in reaction to what I think employers think is happening, which is a level of employees not appreciating being employed. And I think rather it's really this cognitive dissonance that has been occurring for quite some time in the workplace, and then not really feeling appreciated. And as a result, what looks like their productivity is going down, but it's really because the environment that people come to work in doesn't feel like they want it to feel. And I think we're discounting the importance of how it feels to be at work, right? And when you look at cultures that that emanate this sense of belonging, this sense of being, this sense of personal and professional accomplishment, you see, like, watch the posts in LinkedIn, watch the posts in other social avenues, talk to people who work there, and people are like so excited and so, tremendously dedicated to making that company successful that it's really a palatable difference.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's something that, so a lot of these things I think that happen in companies, there's a runway, right? There's a runway for success to build up. There's a runway for things to start to fall apart. And it looks like an event. I don't think it's an event. I think it's a point in time where things kind of turn in a different direction. It takes time for it to get to that collective zeitgeist. And then it looks like an event, but it's not really an event. It's been building up, and it's been like kind of, I would say, kind of like boiling water for spaghetti. So you put the pot of water on, you put some salt on, you turn on the heat. Does it boil instantly? No, it takes time.
Yeah.
But when it boils, and if you're not watching it, you have bubbles and stuff going all over the place, right? And it's a big
You
mess.
spoil your spaghettis, yeah? You won't have fun. They are not al dente, or they are no longer tasty. So we put that in the correlation of the mindset. What with zeitgeist you mentioned is also the necessity of probably going into a new mindset, yeah, which comes more into thinking on employees, on customers, how to drive that forward, and how to make suitable, measurable, positively quotable moment of truth, and that take this in the long run to prove that it is the better way. And I'm asking myself, what are the secrets these days that people do love the place where they work, and comment on Glassdoor that it is a fantastic place to work, or on Kununu or on other platforms. And what is changing right now, that these verifications or quotes might change. Is there still something which drives somebody to go for Apple and say, yes, I would love to work for those company or this company, and that's the real spirit?
So I think, as I said before, half the book is about customer experience and half of the book is about employee experience. And when you really start to reimagine the future of work,
Yeah.
I don't think that sense of belonging that Joseph Campbell talked about has really ever changed. I think he's one of the first people that identified and named it. And I think that when you have a sense of belonging, I think that that's what creates that determination to really dedicate yourself. That sense of
belonging. Okay.
a sense of belonging. And so I think that how you identify what would make someone feel like they belong goes back to being an empathy practitioner. I don't think you can guess. I don't think there's one secret, right? I think it's the process of listening, of being in a conversation, of creating a psychologically safe environment where people can say, here's the things I think are really great, and here's the things that, could be better if, and here's like ways to do that, and being able to have that open and honest discussion in a truthful way, one-on-one as well as in a group, and kind of have that sense of belonging that we're in this together, not as criticism, right? But as we collectively want to bring together the ideas and the innovations and changes that are going to make things better. And that dialogue is really the key, because when you listen, you understand, you have dialogue, you learn, and then you take that and you start to implement it, and then you listen, you understand, you learn, you act, right? So in the book, we talk about the OODA loop, which is this kind of iterative process of repeating the empathy pillars. And when you repeat them, you learn and you continuously learn. And so empathy is not an event. Empathy is a process of being in communication with the people who work for you and for which you lead. And so as an employee, if you're practicing this, as a leader, if you're practicing this, as a team, if you're practicing this, right, then that's when you're really going to get to that sense of, here's what's really fun and fascinating. And when you make a suggestion and people go, yeah, I noticed that too, and you're right, if we did change that, it would be much better. And then people all start to contribute. Well, I saw this and I had this idea, and when I tried this, and then you have people contributing, right? And when people contribute, that contribution is acknowledged in conversation, then what's really important is that you get this sense of belonging. because what you say matters. It creates a difference. It creates community. It creates understanding. And so I think that that's the skill of the future for a leader.
I especially like that you said empathy is a process.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. A lot of people, myself
Thank you.
included, might have said empathy is a quality. And to some extent, I guess that's true, but qualities are yes or no. Either you have it or you don't. Processes can fail. Sometimes the most empathetic person, the most empathetic business process company gets it wrong. It happens.
And
The ability
it
to recover from that.
It looks like you are reminding us that we are on a marathon and not on a short sprint. And taking that picture with the event, the marathon reminds me of the loneliness of the long distance runner from Alan Sillitoe. So if we want to take that mindset and that shape, it is interesting to go back to the question about, will a union stand up? Is there a union which has the right mindset, not going for higher wages, but for something different, which is important?
That will vary from country to country, though, won't it? I mean, I know that in the U.S., salaried employees generally can't unionize, like legally can't, unless they're in a particular type of field, whereas hourly employees, wage earners, can. I don't know if that's true in other countries.
So the idea of union, okay, so let's just look at the words. Empathy is a process. What does union mean to you? Union to me means a coming together, right? So when you come together and you have a collective voice, that collective voice is often stronger than the individual. And so what you start to see is this thing called a union, which we think of a thing, right? An entity versus the idea of a sense of belonging, right? And so I think why people unionize is because their identity and their sense of belonging doesn't match where they work. And so they want a larger body to represent them. So back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we had a lot of in the first industrial revolution, where people couldn't go to the bathroom, they didn't have lunch breaks, there was child labor. That's, the beginnings of a zeitgeist where people didn't feel like their needs and wants were being heard, right? Leaders were not practicing empathy. They were really looking at cost cutting, right? And high productivity. So what's fascinating to me is no matter what point in time in history that you're looking, though some of the circumstances are a little bit different, right? We're not talking about the same things that happened in the first industrial revolution, but we are now in the fifth industrial revolution. And we're still having the same conversation about a sense of belonging, about whether people practice empathy as a process to really understand what's like. So go back to the first industrial revolution. And if those leaders had really said, okay, tell us what's wrong, tell us what you need, what would be better if, right? That didn't happen. And because that didn't happen, employees created a sense of belonging amongst themselves called a union. And so, it's interesting. Someone asked, do we think that employees will unionize to create better morale? What I would like to suggest is, rather than employees getting to the point where they're so mad and so angry that they have to come together as a collective voice, and somehow I think unions seem to threaten companies versus a collective voice to say, we'd really like you to listen to us. We'd really like you to hear what we're saying, is for leaders to become empathy practitioners and from my point of view, if in 100 years someone says, you know, that book that Dr. Nat co-authored, that was the beginning of leaders actually understanding the process of listening, understanding, acting, and learning from the feedback from their customers and employees, it would be a life worth living.
That would be pretty amazing. How do we help that happen?
Have more conversations like this. Have, what would be really fun is to have someone who's read the book come on and talk to us about the impact the book had on their life. Because I, as an empathy practitioner, would love to know how this book impacted them. How did it change them? And as an author, a writer, someone who's often asked to be on podcasts or as a commentator, how can I help, right?
Right.
How can I help you as an individual or a company, right?
That's the listening part after the speaking. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I believe my job.
Whoever has it,
come
and had an impact is
contact
invited.
These guys, contact me, please come and talk. Because for me, the first part of my job was to take my whole career in perspective and create a physical manifestation of listening, understanding, acting, and learning, put that out to the world and say, okay, world, what do you think? Does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Where does it work? Where does it not work? And so now that the book is, a physical thing, now the second piece of my work begins. And that is really listening to understand so that I personally can act differently, right? I don't think you're ever done. Yeah, I think as leaders, we want to think we're done, but we're never done. This is a process, right? And so for me,
leadership is a process too,
yes. So for me, the next steps are to really start to be in dialogue with leaders, with employees, with companies, and to really see how do we take this and make it the new norm.
And don't get as lonely
to the unions once more.
Marathon runner.
This is the unions. One of the main reasons for unions to get created was that employees, people felt a power imbalance. So now, and you said something like, and that's quite true, that unions are treated as looked at as a threat to the business. Now, and I agree to the statement that it is better for the business to include the people rather than just use them. Why doesn't concepts like stakeholder value as opposed to shareholder value don't get more traction then? Because if it's better, then it's just better. So is there no data or isn't it better? What prevents businesses from going there?
So have you ever wanted a washboard stomach?
What is that?
Oh, sorry. Let me translate. A very flat stomach, like to be in physical good condition.
Yeah,
really good condition.
Right. Everybody would like
muscular
and
lean.
Right.
Years ago, I had one. Yeah.
Yes. So and there was work to be done. So what's the difference between having that and not having that? There's work to be done. There are behavior changes that have to happen, and they have to happen consistently, right? And so we as leaders can say, I want a washboard stomach. I want to have a great physique. But then the question becomes, and this is just the innate part of human nature and its relationship to change, is that it is not an easy feat to change. So we ourselves have to have that sense of belonging, that sense of union, that sense of purpose that we want to change. So, Thomas, I don't think that there isn't data that this is a good idea. It comes in the very quiet night when you're really self-reflecting and you're saying, okay, as a leader, I've learned these skills. I've learned to do these things. And now tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to actively change my behaviors.
Yeah, okay,
And
but
so that,
there's one more layer to it. There's one more layer to it. So
okay.
I as an owner of a company, if I am, well, shareholder, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if there's the data that a stakeholder value approach that emphasizes on people, employees as well as customer, is better for business, then why the hell am I not forcing my employees, means my managers, to lead correspondingly? There must be something, some disconnect somewhere.
So I think the disconnect is that when business has been run the same way since I think the first industrial revolution is over 100 years old, right? And it's the way that things have been done. And so we're enculturated to do things the way they are. And there are few companies along that timeline that have proven this to be true or so. There are a lot of companies that have existed that are still profitable that don't use this and are profitable. So people tend to point to those and say, well, it doesn't really matter. We really don't have to change anything because look, there's lots of companies that don't do this and they're still very successful. I personally think that there is I wouldn't say a moment in time, but a section of time where employee mindset is changing and what will be acceptable today won't be acceptable tomorrow. It's going to change. And so we are in what I would call a transition phase where if you go back to the pot of spaghetti, the heat's on, it's starting to boil. It hasn't quite overflowed over the edges of the pot, but we're in that transition stage. And so I would say that for the companies that are looking at this and for leaders who are going to feel a need to examine and change, I think and I don't know the timeline of this, although things are going much faster than they've ever gone before. I think there will be an accelerated phase where not doing this will hurt you because if I'm an employee and I've had this moment of a couple of years of self-reflection and I see other leaders and this idea, right? And it's not an idea that I solely own. You know, Simon Sinek has talked about it, Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence, all kinds of authors and leaders have talked about this change. And I think internally, there's an internal personal zeitgeist that we're all seeking this sense of belonging. So I think what's going to happen is employees are going to kind of look at where they are. They may be doing quiet quitting. And in that time when they're quiet quitting, what are they actually doing? Are they laying on the beach? I think part of what they're doing is they're looking at companies that do exemplify these new values. Now, think it's kind of like a diffusion experiment. There will be an outflux of people from companies that don't exhibit these behaviors and an influx to companies that do. Now, will this take a month, a year, 10 years, 100 years? That I don't know, right? But my theory is that employees will begin to choose and there will be a time when employers who don't exhibit these behaviors, don't exhibit this type of culture, will find it very, very, very difficult to garner the best talent in the world. Talent
We
will go. And what I've talked when I coach companies or I talk to them, would you rather be a company where people are standing outside your door, banging on the door, saying, I want in, I want in, I want to be part of this, right? Or would you rather be a company where people are like, yeah, okay, do we have to turn
oh,
our cameras during a Zoom meeting? Yeah, I'll get back to you, and then they don't. What kind of employee base do you want working for you, right? And when you create that sense of belonging, that sense of union, without it being externally forced because people are so hurt and upset, I think you're going to find that that's where you get innovation, that's where you get productivity. And this is not something that most leaders have spent time thinking about. People who are in talent management, industrial design, have thought a lot about this. And I think we can use the same principles in design thinking to create a whole new field of talent management.
And what we would need is something like a matchmaking platform where we can find those which are going for the new zeitgeist approach.
Right. I think
Those
people
means
do
the
that.
companies or the people?
Well, so if you want to be a company that's like that, then I mean, what are your avenues right now? It's advertising, right? Commercials on TV or on LinkedIn. I see, as I look through my LinkedIn posts, there are leaders who post, and you can tell their sense of creating that kind of sense of belonging, right? And so I think what you're talking about is an automation for finding those companies that exhibit these qualities, right? And I think people are just looking on their own and looking to see what is out there and what companies actually exhibit these kinds of cultures. And like places where people look to see, do I want to go there or not, are like Glassdoor, blind, right?
Right.
And that helps someone start to put together a sense of, and I think there's probably 3 categories, right? And this is a huge generalization. It's really horrible and you're having a hard time retaining talent. It's okay. It's not great. It's not bad, right? And then there's like the uber excitement, right? Where people are really gigged to be there. If I was a CEO, I would not want to be draining talent. I would not want to be leading a company where people felt it was okay to be there. I would want to be part of a company where people were super excited. Because I think that if you're paying them $1, right, for a day's work or whatever that number is, like not $1, but let's say X amount of money for that work, do you want them to really come to work and really be excited and give that full sense of self? Or are you okay if they only bring 60 or 80%? And I think most leaders don't realize that's what employees do.
Looking at terminology, you are always saying leaders. Are managers, executives who are not taking care of their personnel leaders, or are they just managers? Just in quotes. Okay, I'm already qualifying.
Right. So language is really important. Nomenclature is really important. Leader implies that, well, leader could imply that you take an empathetic approach, right? That you're actually listening to your employees and your customers. So it depends on how you define those words. If you define leader as someone who uses empathy as a process to continually be in communication with their customers, employees, products, services, then that's one definition of leader. I think leader tends to be positional and someone who has positional power. Maybe it refers to the CXO suite, right? And managers tend to be people at the director level or lower, right? So I think are we talking about the positional power of someone, or are we talking about the qualitative, quantitative qualities and behaviors of what it means to be a leader?
Like being a leader by nature as opposed to by job description.
Position.
Right. Positional power. Yeah. I mean, and that's I think a lot to unpack, right? It's a whole other conversation of what does it mean to lead? What does it mean to be able to garnish the excitement and enthusiasm of your employees? And if we're defining leader as being that kind of person, I think people who would be attracted to leadership might be very different than people who are in leadership positions today. Because if that's the definition, If your job is to get people excited about being there, that's it might be a different definition than someone whose responsibility is to shareholder value.
I'm grateful for Isaac and their attitude to train young people in getting the right understanding of leadership. My three sons have been through that process, are all qualified trainers, and they have a much impact on my behavior. Trust me.
That's good to know. That's really good to know. I think the definition of what it means to be a leader is changing.
Yeah.
And I think what's required, because I think what's required of being a leader is changing, because what employees want and need has changed.
And empathic CRM, which is one of my hashtags I'm driving on and do not get tired, is the mission I'm on. Yeah. And it's an interesting one. It's a long run. It's a marathon. I love that picture with the long runway. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it goes back to the washboard stomach. It takes time, right? It takes time for new ideas to take hold. It takes time for the ramifications of going in an old direction, right? Like Southwest went in a new direction, then they went back to the old direction. It took time for that to unfold, to see those results. What will be really interesting is to see what happens next, right?
That's the perfect keyword for the famous last words. What
And a good
if you
lead
look
in for
into
the
your
next
glass
time
bowl?
we have you here.
Glass ball, not glass bowl, glass ball. What will happen next? 2023, 24?
Good
Your
question.
opinion, Natalie. Yeah, of course. At least we wouldn't ask it to you.
I mean, I think it's going to happen faster than changes happened in the past, only because we've had that moment in time, which is actually several years of the pandemic, to give us that cause for pause. And I think that with that recognition, that internal kind of reckoning in ourselves about what's most important to us, I don't know that that's changed, right? That's going to stick with us. And then we're maybe slowly, or in some cases faster, we're starting to change what's important to us and what we're choosing. And so how long will that take? I think you'll see some ramifications of this in the next 2 to 5 years, and big ramifications in 10. We'll see if I'm right. We'll talk again.
We'll talk
Looking
in 10
forward
years,
to
yeah.
it.
And in between.
I hope for the world, because I would want a world where we all felt appreciated and a sense of belonging, a sense of union with the people that we work with, we work for, we help produce products and services. I would want that for every single person. I would want that for every leader, every manager, every employee, and every customer who's loyal to the people who make those things happen. So for me, it can't happen soon enough.
And I hope it will not take 5 years till we see each other again.
No. We'll see each other soon.
That will be earlier, yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, Natalie. And thanks a lot, to everybody who was in and active. A couple of good questions and comments.
Yep.
Thanks to the people who weren't active too. We love you.
Yep.
Yeah,
it takes
of course
a community.
We do.
Yes.
And see you next time. We are going backstage now. Bye.
Take care.